Hello, and welcome to another Debating Europe expert panel responding to your questions and comments on Europe. My name is Joe Litobarski. I'm the editor-in-chief of Debating Europe, and today we're asking what can Europe learn from the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of drug and vaccine development? What lessons are there to be learned? I'm joined today by Olga Solomon, Head of Unit for Medicines, Policy Authorization and Monitoring at the European Commission, DG Sante. Hello, Olga.
Good morning. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. And I'm also joined by Virginia Atcher, Global Lead, Global Regulatory Policy at the pharmaceutical company MSD. Welcome, Ginny.
Thanks, Joe. Nice to be here with you and Olga.
Thank you. It's good to have you both here. So this panel that we're running now, it's following the same format as our other panels. It's part of a series that Debating Europe is running on the future of healthcare called Healthcare Next. And if you go to our website, debatingeurope.eu, you'll be able to see other videos in the series. And the approach is pretty straightforward. You have sent us in some fantastic video questions. We're going to go through as many as we can. We'll get responses from both panelists to what you've said. That's it. As simple as that. We've got half an hour. Let's start with the first question. So the first one was sent in by a new reader. Let me bring it up. Andre. Okay, let's play the first question.
Hello, my name is Andrea Maravilla and I want to ask what are the actual risks of rushing a vaccine like COVID-19? What makes a vaccine take so long normally?
Okay, so maybe Olga, I could start with you. So what would you say to Andre if he put that question to you?
Yeah, it is a very good question, actually, and it was one of the important questions to reply to citizens, when we were asking, for people to be vaccinated. And for us in the Commission that we work very closely with the agency to provide, for safe and effective medicines, that was a priority question in the beginning of the crisis. I must say that, it was an amazing achievement that in first place we could have a vaccine. And that was thanks to technologies that they were known or others that they were developed like the mRNA for other uses, for example, cancer. So the research and the knowledge was there. Indeed, as it is very often quoted, and Andrea said, we all hear that, vaccines, and it is very true, not vaccines, but medicines in general take almost 10 years for the development. And there, we saw, really reducing this time to, a year or 12, 18 months. But that was to reassure you that it was not at all, by cutting corners. Everything needed to be sorted, and we saw an amazing global effort in that respect. So why this was possible, it was, first of all, there was a lot of global collaboration that happened in terms of science. And, we saw scientists all over the world collaborating, something which is not happening very often, because each company, develops its own product. Here we saw a global collaboration in science. Then we could use existing, for example, it was impressive that, using genomic sequencing, we could find out about the viral sequence of the virus, just, a few weeks after we saw the first case in China. And then, there was normally we have 3 phases. I'm sure that Dini will explain this even better, of development and clinical trials, 3 phases clinical trials. The fact that the virus was so predominantly present, these clinical trials could happen in big group of people. We had also a lot of volunteers so a lot of the different phases of the clinical trials could happen faster. Now, from our side, it was, and when I say our side, I mean, both the European Medicines Agency and the Commission, we put mechanism in place so that everything that had with the evaluation of the data provided would happen very fast. The agency had a system of rolling review, so basically, assessing the data as fast as they were coming in. And from the side of regulatory flexibility, we also made a lot of efforts. For example, vaccines that there will be medicines that will be authorized in 67 days. By the Commission, it was 1 day. Anyway, these are actually the detail of the procedural. But what I wanted to reassure it is that with regard to the assessment of this vaccine, everything happened, with the most rigorous assessment and studies that, they would apply to any medicine. And last but not least, I wanted to say that, these vaccines, they were monitored after the authorization very tightly. For example, just to give an example, companies were asked, in addition to what we call pharmacovigilance reporting, to report back every month on each vaccine. And this allows us, the regulators to take actions where necessary. So, these are, I would say, the most tested, vaccines ever being used in such big, part of the population. And, we are really, proud that we could achieve this, and ensure the safety, and of citizens. And 86% of the adult population in Europe is vaccinated right now, which is quite amazing.
That is amazing indeed. Absolutely. Ginny, maybe you can tell us, okay, so we've heard from the regulatory process, what happened during the pandemic. What make it, in terms of Andre's question, what makes a vaccine take so long normally? What would you say from the kind of the perspective of industry? what's the normal process, and how did that compare to what happened during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think we're all overwhelmed with the success that the vaccines have had, and all to the credit, as Olga's described, of that very collaborative, very rigorous process. As Olga says, no, I don't remember a case where we've had this much scrutiny and assessment done in such a comprehensive way and internationally linked. For the developers, I think it's also been an exceptional 2.5 years. So again, I think if you had asked me in March 2020, could we get to a vaccine that quickly? I don't think I would have been alone to say it would be astounding, almost unbelievable. So the fact that we ended up with 2 is really something really remarkable, and explains a little bit about how the focus of our human ingenuity, when correctly applied, can really address the problem. And I think one of the things that I'd like to explain, because again, we are used to timelines that are more like in decades than in years for development. What was the trade-off? And really, just to help to explain this, usually when we're developing a vaccine or a new therapeutic, you go through different stages of proof that really allows the developer to take measured decisions around the risk and the cost of developing that candidate. Because of the urgency, developers were doing things at risk and in parallel. So I can speak very personally about this, because we had 2 vaccines that we were pursuing that did not make the grade, at least for the COVID-19 indication that we were seeking. So, we were not alone. There were a lot of companies, hundreds of companies, who were working on vaccines and therapeutics, and not all of them have now something available. And that's because of the nature of the science. There's still a lot of deep uncertainty. So whilst there was no risks taken in terms of the assessment procedure, there was commercial risk that was taken to undertake projects that maybe were not likely to happen. But we felt obviously, as everybody did, that the urgency to save lives was such that, it was kind of a no-brainer. What it also meant, though, is that, and this was true for all of us, we had to put other projects on the back burner and to focus. And that's one thing we learned about this pandemic, was that incredible focus from the developers, from the commission in this case, from Olga and the team at DG Sante, as well as from the European Medicines Agency and the national competence authorities, were really the galvanizing force. But it meant that there were other things that maybe we had to put on the back burner, which now we have to, fortunately come back to now. Question is that's a trade-off. And so we don't necessarily want to put everything on park regularly. We want to be able to develop, cancer treatments, diabetes treatments, other things. And when we're so singularly focused on a pandemic, that was where you could get some savings. We could repurpose people, we could repurpose production. As Olga was saying, we could organize the clinical capacity to deal with that. But that's not something necessarily sustainable. And likewise, the rolling reviews were key. And yet, now as we're trying to move into the future, the question is, what can we take forward that's sustainable and valuable to continue?
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really, really interesting to hear. And actually, no, maybe that links to the next question. So let's maybe move to that, because this is from Nunes, and I'll just play his question now.
Hello, my name is Nuno Ferreira. I'm from Portugal, and I would like how the EU is preparing for the next pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay. Olga, would you like to come in and respond to Nunes? How is the EU preparing for the next pandemic, particularly considering, what Ginny's just been saying about kind of trade-offs? If we're always preparing and kind of building up capacity for the next pandemic, what it may be, are we kind of ignoring other things that we could be looking at? What's your kind of response?
Yeah, it actually it was a huge learning experience to deal in the Commission with this pandemic. And I think that it is not a secret to anyone that the way that, in the Union we reacted in the beginning, it was a bit slow. I mean, citizens, they were not very happy, and it is always the issue between the national competence about the organization of the health systems and, what it can be done at European level. But it was very soon that it was obvious that the best way to deal with this crisis, it is to collaborate together. And again, at times this felt, slow, but, there has been action very quickly. And we learned from this, for example, just when the crisis started, member states felt like they need to take action themselves to actually protect their own citizens. And then this created in the beginning disruption, even in the circulation of goods, the circulation of people, and the supply chain. So immediately we needed, and everyone felt that needed to take action. And this led, as everyone knows, to this incredible effort of collaborating not only in areas of research, and science, as we mentioned before, but also, in the purchasing of these vaccines in a way that it would be equitable for all citizens across the EU. And that was something that it was unique. At the time, people would complain that, this didn't happen quite fast. The authorization, was slow because every day counted. But in reality, looking back, this happened in such a quick, and, impressive, way of collaboration. And then Nunes is really right that, we must not just stop in one effort, in one crisis, because, we have new coming up, and we know that they will come in the future. So the initiatives of the Commission focus mainly, of how to organize ourselves for the future, actually how to build stronger health systems in times of peace, and how to invest in a way that, we are prepared for the next crisis. And there were a lot and many initiatives that took place. It is covered by an umbrella initiative which is called the Health Union, and several actions under that. For example, the reinforcement of the health agencies, the ECDC and the European Medicines Agency, in order to provide, more scientific support in preparedness and crisis. Also, the creation of HERA, it was the Health Emergency and Preparedness and Response Authority in the EU. It is an investment that we do for preparing for crisis and bringing together member states to collaborate, to actually invest before the crisis, in the development, production and procurement of what we call medical countermeasures. So basically medicines, medical devices that you need during the crisis. And of course, there has been a lot of funding. We must not forget that there is the next generation EU with 800 billion euros invested, and also, a much reinforced EU for health program, with 10 times more money than it used to be. All these are investments so that, we are not investing only how to handle crisis, but how to prepare for them. And then a bit longer term, initiatives, it is also the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, where we invest basically in policies to make the pharmaceutical policy, more robust also for times of peace.
Okay, no, interesting. I think, that you brought up this question of investment. This kind of goes back to the heart of it, really. What do you invest in? How do you do that sensibly so that you're prepared for the next crisis, but you're also able to focus on some of these things that Ginny was talking about, cures for cancer, cures for rare diseases, and so on. Where do those resources go? Ginny, I'm going to put the same question to you. So we've got possibly, we have monkeypox, which people are very worried about at the moment. We've got maybe a resurgence of COVID-19 in the winter. We don't know. We will see. There's also, and then there's kind of longer term. We've had one pandemic. We know that they can happen. I mean, we could see another one in our lifetimes, hopefully not. How do we prepare? What should the EU be doing?
So I think, as Olga's already mapped out very nicely, how the Commission and the European member states are looking at dealing with, those very different levels. So first of all, that surveillance. So we don't entirely know where the next pandemic is going to come from, but we do know where likely candidate pathogens may be coming from. And that's something that we should be investing in. And more importantly, that's a global surveillance, because it's more likely that these pathogens will come to Europe maybe from another part of the world. And this is that famous, very important point that was made throughout the pandemic, that no one is safe until we're all safe. And that's true for surveillance. We need to always help each other be on the lookout. And then the planning to be ready. And I think the important role that DG HERA has to play for Europe cannot be underestimated. It's an important mechanism for making sure that we are able to activate in a much more seamless and quick way, and we don't lose the weeks that we had to work through this time to be able to act and engage on a level that we can put things on the right footing as soon as possible. And then I think what Olga was describing in terms of the broader work around the pharmaceutical legislation and the broader piece is really key. So what this pandemic didn't necessarily identify or generate new crises. It accentuated problems that were already there. It was like a very big magnifying glass. So anything that was kind of not working beautifully before, it really was a pain point in the pandemic. So we have to use this opportunity to make our healthcare system as robust and effective as it can be, and to make sure that we are delivering on those accounts. And from the same side, that innovation is really working in its best directions, and appropriate efforts are made to ensure that science and innovation continues to be a cornerstone of our European success in healthcare and globally. So we are taking some of the lessons that we've learned, both in terms of what worked, what was really fortuitous in this past pandemic, having platform technologies that are ready to go, having manufacturing systems that are ready to go, that we're working on those now, because they're important on a day-to-day basis and not just for a pandemic. But without a question, if we don't have those common and foundational systems working well, then we're not, by definition, we're not going to be at our best for a next health crisis.
Okay, so look, we've already talked about a little bit about some of the things that Europe could have done better, and I think with this next question we're going to get right into that. So let's play the question. It's from Maria.
Hello, my name is Megan, and regarding the question, I wanted to ask, what do you think EU could have done better regarding the teamwork between the countries in the EU?
Okay, excellent question, Maria. Really good. And Olga, you had kind of mentioned this a little bit before when you talked about, how national healthcare systems could have kind of coordinated a little bit better. What would your response to Maria be? What could be done better in terms of teamwork between countries in the EU?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, that indeed we were a bit slow in actually find this, links that brought together the member states, and understand that coordination at that point, it was extremely important. And of course, it's not the first crisis that we learned from. Actually, in Europe, several policies they have developed as a result of crisis in the area of food safety, for example, even in health. It is an extremely sensitive area for us working in EU affairs, when you are dealing with, health policies, because they're clearly very close to the heart of the member state. So it's not something that, they are very much their national policies, and how they take care of, the organization of the health systems. It's very much their prerogative. But this crisis actually brought together, in a common interest. And, we saw this happening, as I mentioned before, with the, by June 2022, we had 1.7 billion doses of vaccines that they were actually, available for citizens across the EU. This could have never happened, through this collaboration. So it's not like the whole organization structure of the health policies in the EU will change dramatically at a certain immediately. But I think that we learned a lot how collaboration can improve this, and I think that. Also, member states they're looking into ways that to get advantage of the lessons learned from this crisis. And then, we must not forget that, to collaborate, we have actually instruments that, where, there is EU competence. And like Ginny mentioned before, the investment in a new pharmaceutical policy, it is something extremely important. And, the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation in aims, for example, in one of the main focus, it is access. It is patient access to innovative medicines in general, and not only in times of crisis. Ginny mentioned cancer. It is very important that we make this investment, and that citizens in the EU they have access to this crisis. So sorry, I'm probably shifting to different things, but the key word here it is collaboration, and there is many ways to collaborate, and we learned from this crisis, and there is an investment, I think, in policies to bring the union closer with regard to health policies, without intervening, of course, into the competencies of the member states.
Okay, and Ginny, what does it look like as a medicine developer? Is it easy to kind of navigate these different national policies? What's your perspective?
It's an added layer of complexity, without a doubt. But I think during the pandemic, I think what I just, especially to call out from my perspective, and particularly on the way we were managing the regulatory arrangements for supply and development, the Commission convened relatively early regular meetings where we were able to come in as developers, and there were representatives from different parts of the Commission, but also from the member states and the European Medicines Agency to discuss. And I understand there was also quite a number of separate meetings within that group to try and coordinate between the national competent authorities and the European Medicines Agency on the planning. And I think that was a really good workaround, because we did run into challenges. There were a number of guidelines that were issued over the period. I have a collection of many, especially in 2020, in the dozens of guidance arrangements. And, to some extent, they were somewhat dependent on member states recognizing that role and those changes. And for some member states, that was easier than for others. So there were always these small elements, or big elements sometimes, to navigate through. And when we did some research within our European Trade Association, EFPIA, with colleagues from Medicines for Europe and Vaccines Europe, we did find that that was probably the biggest pain point that companies were finding, is that where there was sort of disconnects between when the central communications were going out and the way member states were interpreting them. But my experience, and I think the experience of my colleagues, is that, you know, when we brought this to the attention of the Commission, they acted. And so we were able to resolve them. The plan for the future is that we can get ahead of that with DG HERA having that strong member state participation to try and get resolution as quickly as possible. And I think that will go beyond even a pandemic setting. I think it's just part of a general trend where the member states and the European Commission initiatives in the Parliament are working in concert to try and resolve this situation for the best for patients in Europe and globally.
Okay, Ginny, I'm gonna stay with you for the next question, because I
Sure.
think it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on this, and then we'll go to Olga. Let's play this next question. It's from Carolina.
Hi, my name is Carolina, and my question would be, do you think that in the next pandemic, considering what happened in Europe relating to the rollout of the COVID vaccines, and especially in the European Union, would you think that we could make it different the next time we have a pandemic? Because we know that will certainly happen, considering the patent of the vaccines and relationships with the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you.
Ginny, I think this question of the relationship with the pharmaceutical industry in particular is really, really interesting. I mean, look, we've had some difficult relationships. We've seen lawsuits. We've seen clearly it was a very stressful time. You know, what's the relationship like at the moment? Has it been bruised by the experience of the pandemic? Is it strong? What would you respond to, Carolina?
So I would say, first of all, that the experience that we have as an industry and globally is that with our conversations around the pandemics, we have certainly not always agreed, not always aligned entirely with where some voices want to go, but I think we all know each other a lot better. For one, I think in particular, speaking from a regulatory perspective, I doubt many people really knew what I did until about 2 years ago. So we know each other a lot better. And I think one thing I'd like to help take us even further about is the question of patents. I'm really glad to get this question. I should also explain that before coming into pharma, that was my area of research as an academic, and I used a lot of analyses on patents and innovation patterns. And what we know about patents is that they're kind of a social bargain of being able to share the outcome of scientific exploration in a transparent way, whilst maintaining an incentive for the innovator to keep investing. What we also, and that's been a very tried and true approach about advancing innovation, particularly in the life sciences, where it's been arguably the biggest driver for investment capital and efforts to go into new design. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't tend to block supply. So you do have, in fact, at the minute, quite a lot of supply of vaccines and therapeutics around the world, where they're unfortunately one of the bigger concerns we have is vaccine hesitancy, which we need to all collaborate on. But in terms of supply, the supplies are there, and the patents don't necessarily get in the way, particularly if you can negotiate additional partnerships. So in my company, we have now voluntary licenses, which we've set up with our therapeutic with 8 partners in India. It's been put through the medicines patent pool. So we are, as industry, trying to make that available as much as possible. But if we don't have the incentives to innovate, my concern is that for the next pandemic, that really erodes the opportunity for innovators to take their ideas forward. It will act like a dampener, and that's not just me saying that. That's quite a lot of academic studies that have shown what kind of shadow effects you get when you restrict the ability to incentivize the innovator in an effective way. So I don't want to see that, because honestly, I want my children to be protected from future pandemics. I want their children to be protected. And I'm a strong believer in innovation as being a driver for ultimate health gains. And I think that's what, again, this pandemic has shown, is that, as I was mentioning earlier, we had a lot of strikes on goal. We had a lot of people trying to answer the call, and in a way that they felt that their innovations would be respected and rewarded. And what I don't want to see is that in the next pandemic, there's many fewer efforts in that regard. So this is a really important issue right now, and currently being debated under the TRIPS IP arrangements. And I hope, again, that we can see strong solidarity amongst the governments to really stand behind innovation in that positive way.
And Olga, what would you say to Carolina and her question on vaccine, on the relationship with the pharmaceutical industry and on patents, on vaccine patents?
Yeah, I think that, in the specific way of the patents and the use of the patents during the crisis and in relation to the vaccines, I think that from the point of view of the EU, the objective of the patents, it is to ensure that the intellectual, the policy that the intellectual property allows to, first of all, to deploy the existing production capacity, to create new production capacity, and the most important, to provide access to citizens to the vaccines and treatments. I mean, I agree with Jeannie that patents, it is, one of the instruments that we have to protect the investment in innovation, and therefore they are extremely important. And therefore, in terms of the patents in the EU, we believe that the voluntary licensing, like we have seen, it is something important in order to facilitate expansion of production. But at the same time, if this doesn't happen, so then we also consider that, for example, compulsory licensing in some occasions may be justified, because the most important thing it is to have this expansion of production and availability of products. Now, in the EU, as part of the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation, we are looking, as I said before, into ways to balance the absolute right of companies to actually be rewarded and, about the investment in the innovation that they did, but with the right also of patients to have access. Because what we see sometimes it is that, innovation is not enough if innovation does not reach the patients. And then we're looking into not exactly patents, but also, the other protection periods to see how we can, balance the protection that companies get about, their investment with measures that they can actually, provide more for patients. For example, how we can have investment in areas of unmet medical needs, where actually, patients need more medicines, and not only where there is economic profit. Or, how we see that citizens across the EU, they don't have the same way access, so we are trying to look into ways to make it more equitable across, for access across the EU. So the system of incentives and patent is very powerful and very justified, but at the same time, it needs to be balanced by the needs of the health systems and of patients.
Can I just add into Olga's point, because I think we're totally agreed on the need for access for patients. That's certainly what my company, what my peer colleagues in FPA would certainly say. I think the other piece of it that we need to bear in mind, though, is even if I gave you a patent, I don't give you an ability to necessarily produce what I'm producing. So the patent explains a key part of the innovation. It doesn't necessarily give the ability to produce that to everybody that would take it. And I think that's a key question. So compulsory licenses sound like they're effective, but in very few cases, or I can't really think of any, they solved a problem, because ultimately it's about getting the right production and supply, and getting that supply to the patients through distribution, which sometimes is pretty challenging if it's very novel products. So I think incentives are really key. We need to make sure that everybody is geared to delivering on the goals that are shared. We want to provide access. We just need to figure out how we're going to get that alignment agreed. And this time that we have right now between this crisis and the next, which may not be very far away, we have to come to terms on this. And this is why this is such an important time for Europe in the conversations around the pharmaceutical legislation and the broader pharmaceutical strategy of how we're going to work in the future. And this is, I think it could be such an opportunity for Europe to really guide not just our activities in Europe, but give a global steer for how this could work more effectively in future.
Okay, I think we have time. We're out of time almost, but we have
sorry.
time for maybe no. We have one more question. I think I'm going to group. So these next two questions are very similar. So I think I'll play them back to back. It's Eduardo and Sarah. So we will hear from them, and then we'll have a last kind of response from the panel, and we'll close things down. So first, Eduardo, over to you, and then Sarah.
Hello, my name is Eduardo, and I would like to ask if the vaccine development process should be sped up for other vaccines, or if the new development methods for the vaccines, for example, the mRNA vaccines, can be used for other diseases, not such like COVID-19, but now with monkeypox, and future diseases like the superviruses and prehistoric bacteria that could now emerge from Siberia due to global warming, if the techniques that we developed and that we use to develop the COVID vaccines could be used to treat future diseases.
Hello, my name is Sarah. I wanted to ask if you believe that it would be possible to apply similar techniques of the coronavirus vaccination to other viruses, such as the human immunodeficiency virus, and if yes, how much time do you think it will be necessary to achieve? Thank you.
Okay, now the reason I've grouped both those questions is because they're both asking about innovation. If we can learn anything in terms of vaccine development, what kind of new innovations might we see coming out of the pandemic? Olga, maybe I can put this to you first, and then we'll finish with Ginny. Olga, what do you hope for? What are you maybe excited for? What innovations could we see?
Yeah, I mean, I will be short because I think Ginny has more to say from the company perspective. But from the regulatory perspective, we are following the developments with a lot of excitement as well, because, we really believe that, the technologies that we saw developing under the crisis can be used for other vaccines. And, we are, seeing also developments about platform technologies, where we can actually have the platform and develop, medicines for other infectious diseases rapidly, etc. So from the regulatory perspective, we are actually watching these developments extremely, with a lot of enthusiasm. And what we want to do, it is to create the right environment so that these things can be accommodated, and like Tini said before, to avoid problems that were accentuated during the crisis and facilitate such developments and authorization of such medicines. And as I said, I think Tini, will be more appropriate to give you a bit more of the science and, the technology behind it.
Ginny, please. So then what would you say? What are you excited about potentially being developed out of the pandemic? Well,
first of all, just I think what Olga's describing is really important, because that's the infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure that allows us to pursue these further. So important. But yes, I mean, in a simple sense, I mean, any crisis generates a lot of technological change. This one certainly has. And I think some of the development platforms and technologies, the mRNA, but beyond that, are going to be applied in many settings. And there's a lot of things that we've learned in the scientific procedures of evolving that work. And ultimately, though, the real success that we need with whether we're going to deal with an HIV virus or with other pathogens that we haven't seen yet, I think this is where we need the marriage with science in terms of the scientific academic community and not just the commercial, because there's a lot of about these pathogens that we still genuinely don't understand, and we don't understand how they affect the human biology. And Olga mentioned it right up top. It was so essential for us to be able to get the genetic sequence of the COVID virus and to understand how it was evolving, because it is a moving target. And we need to understand these different procedures. And this is where it is equally important for us as companies to see science in academic settings growing and flourishing, and partnerships with them, because I think what we've all seen through this pandemic isn't just an investment and an effort by companies like mine, but also from academics, many academics, and I think many here in Europe who I hope will continue to be supported. And if anything, what would be great as a legacy from this pandemic is to see an even better in growth of what some people call the triple helix of academic, corporate, and government science and innovation working together.
That is a nice message to close out the panel with, I think. Good, wonderful. Well, thank you both to my panelists for a fascinating discussion. Thank you at home for watching. Thank you for sending in your questions. If you have more questions, please, we'll continue this discussion on debatingeurope.eu. You can send us in your questions and we'll put them to experts and to policymakers for a response. And stay tuned for more panels in this series. We're going to be discussing in future videos, kind of going into depth in healthcare, looking at kind of resilience and the future of healthcare across Europe. Once again, thank you to my panel, and don't forget to like and subscribe.